He drew a line in the sand that nobody else dared to cross. He looked at the other survivors, eyes wide with hysteria, and he effectively said, "I don't believe you." He demanded to put his actual finger into the jagged hole of a spear wound before he would concede that a dead man was walking. We call him Doubting Thomas. We use his name as an insult for anyone who lacks faith. But we have gotten this story completely wrong. If you zoom out, if you look at the raw data of what actually happened in the days following the crucifixion, you find a shocking anomaly. It wasn't just Thomas. When Jesus appeared alive, almost none of them believed it. The tidy Sunday school narrative of immediate, joyful acceptance is a fabrication. The reality was a psychological horror story of trauma, paralysis, and a skepticism so deep it required forensic evidence to break. This is the forgotten history of the apostles who refused to believe, and why their doubt is actually the strongest proof we have. To understand why they cracked, you have to understand the pressure cooker they were living in. We read these texts with 20/20 hindsight. We know the ending. We know the tomb is empty. They didn't know anything. For them, the movement had just hit a brick wall at 100 miles an hour. Their leader, the man they were convinced was the geopolitical and spiritual savior of Israel, hadn't just died. He had been executed by the state in the most shameful way invented by the Roman Empire. This wasn't a tragic detour, it was a total refutation of their worldview. Look at the scene in John chapter 20. It doesn't describe a prayer meeting. It describes a bunker. The text says the doors were locked for fear of the Jews. Unpack that. These men are fugitives. They are huddled in a room, smelling their own fear, waiting for the heavy boots of the Roman guard to kick down the door and drag them to the same cross. Their primary emotion wasn't anticipation. It was survival. It was trauma. Peter is crushing under the weight of denying he even knew Jesus. The others are reeling from their own cowardice. This is the psychological soil of the room. Grief, guilt, and terror. It is the worst possible environment for hope to survive. They believed the story was over. They believed they had wasted their lives. So when the first report comes in, watch how they react. It doesn't come from the men. It comes from the women. Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, who went to the tomb to deal with a corpse, not a resurrection. They come running back, breathless, screaming that the body is gone and angels are speaking. And the response from the future pillars of the church? Silence? Awe? No. Rejection. Luke chapter 24 gives us the brutal reality. It says these words appeared to the apostles as nonsense, but the English translation is too polite. The original Greek word used here is leros. It's medical slang. It implies delirious talk, babbling, the ravings of a sick mind. It's where we get the word delirious. They didn't just doubt the women. They diagnosed them. They dismissed the first proclamation of the gospel as hysterical garbage. Even Peter, who runs to the tomb and sees the linen strips, doesn't fall to his knees. The text says he went home wondering. He was confused. He was processing a crime scene, not a miracle. The skepticism goes deeper. Look at Mary Magdalene herself. She is the first human being in history to see the risen Christ. She is looking right at him, and she thinks he is the gardener. Her grief is so blinding, her trauma is so thick, that she cannot process the visual data in front of her. She asks him if he moved the body. It takes a specific auditory trigger, Jesus saying her name, Mary, to snap her out of this cognitive blindness. This is a crucial pattern. Trauma makes the supernatural invisible. But the most heartbreaking example of this blindness happens on a 7-mile stretch of dirt road leading to Emmaus. 2 disciples are walking away from Jerusalem. That direction matters. They are walking away from the scene of the crime, away from the movement. A stranger joins them. It's Jesus, disguised by their own disbelief, and they start talking. Listen to what they say to him. They don't say, "We are waiting to see if he returns." Cleopas says, "We had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel." Past tense. Had hoped. That sentence is the tombstone of their faith. It's over. They admit they heard the rumors of the empty tomb, but they treat it like a confusing anecdote, not a solution. Jesus spends hours giving them the greatest lecture in history, connecting every dot from Moses to the prophets, explaining why the Messiah had to suffer. And they still don't recognize him. Intellectual data wasn't enough. It wasn't until he sat at their table, took the bread, and broke it, a reenactment of their last meal, that the sensory memory triggered recognition. And then, he vanished. They ran 7 miles back to the city, lungs burning, fueled by adrenaline, to tell the others. Now, you would think this is the tipping point. The Emmaus guys burst into the locked room. Peter has seen him. The women saw him. The consensus is building. And then, Jesus manifests in the room. He stands right there. And the reaction is terror. Luke 24 says they were startled and frightened, and supposed that they saw a spirit. Let that sink in. They have the testimony of multiple witnesses, and yet when they see him with their own retinas, their brain defaults to ghost. Fear overrides evidence. They are paralyzed. Jesus realizes that a theological argument won't work here. He needs to get physical. He says, "Touch me. A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones." He shows them the mutilated tissue of his hands and feet. And even then, the text says they disbelieved for joy. It was too good to be true. Their brains were short-circuiting. So Jesus does something incredibly mundane. He asks, "Is there anything to eat?" They hand him a piece of broiled fish, and he eats it. This isn't a throwaway detail. This is the anchor. Ghosts don't digest protein. Hallucinations don't chew. The sound of him eating, the grease on his fingers, the swallowing. This biological reality is what finally shatters their doubt. He didn't demand blind faith. He ate a fish dinner in front of them to prove he wasn't a phantom. This brings us back to Thomas. The man wasn't a villain. He was a scientist. He was an empiricist. When the others told him, "We saw him," Thomas effectively said, "I need peer review." He refused to be swept up in groupthink. He said, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." He is demanding forensics. He wants to touch the lethal wounds. A week later, Jesus walks through the locked door again, and he goes straight to Thomas. He doesn't scold him. He doesn't mock him. He offers him the data. "Put your finger here," Jesus says. "Reach out your hand and put it into my side." He invites the invasion of his own wounds to satisfy Thomas's need for truth. And that is the moment Thomas breaks. He gives the highest confession of anyone in the Gospels, "My Lord and my God." His doubt was the fuel for the absolute strongest conviction in the entire Bible. But the story doesn't end neatly. There is one final, uncomfortable detail that most pastors skip. In Matthew 28, the disciples meet Jesus on a mountain in Galilee for the Great Commission. This is the end of the movie. They have seen him, touched him, watched him eat. And verse 17 drops a bomb. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Some doubted. The Greek word is distazo. It means to hesitate, to waver, to stand in two places at once. Even looking at the risen Christ, some of them were struggling to process the reality of it. And here is the kicker. Jesus doesn't fire them. He doesn't kick the waverers off the mountain. He looks at this group, this mixed bag of worshipers and doubters, and he hands them the keys to the kingdom. He says, "Go and make disciples of all nations." He commissions the doubters. This is why this story matters. If the Bible were a made-up propaganda piece, this detail would be cut immediately. You don't end your hero story by saying the lieutenants weren't sure if it was real. You only include that if it actually happened. The skepticism of the disciples is the authentication of the resurrection. They were dragged kicking and screaming into belief. They went from nonsense and ghosts to dying for this truth. People will die for a belief they think is true, but nobody dies for what they know is a lie. Their transformation from cowards in a locked room to martyrs of the faith is the ultimate proof. Their doubt gives you permission to have yours. It shows us that faith isn't the absence of questions. It's the courage to keep walking the road until you recognize who is walking beside you.